We have started this discussion in a previous session. We want to proceed with that discussion and try to explain some of the issues involved in learning to write creatively in a second language. I have worked with numerous students and writers who have been struggling to write in English, and English is not their mother tongue, it is their second language. Now, there are many sides to this struggle. Initially, of course, every writer has to try and deal with the mechanics of the language, that is, with the grammar of the language. They have to learn competence in using the definite and indefinite articles. They have to learn to use prepositions correctly. They have to learn to use the tenses in an appropriate way, and learn the art of agreement of subject and verb, agreement in terms of numbers, use of past and present tense. These are things that can be mastered, and they can be mastered gradually. Much more difficult is mastering the idiom of the language. Now, the idiom of any language is the various expressions in the language, which comes naturally to first language speakers. But for second language speakers, there are certain difficulties. For example, if you are learning the English language and you haven't spent a great deal of time learning the language, you will find that some expressions in the language that appear to you to be fresh and original are really worn out expressions. Expressions that have been overused over a period of time, and they do not have the same sparkle anymore. For a second language learner, it may not appear so, because you're just approaching the language for the first time, and you can't recognize what we call the cliches of the language, overused expressions. So here's a real struggle for second language learners to learn the idioms of a particular language. Now, it is not impossible, and I'm going to suggest a couple of ways in which you can become a good user of idioms of a particular language. First is listen to good speakers of the English language. You might tune on to BBC or any broadcaster that you like listening to, and listen carefully to good speakers in cinema, good speakers in the public, be it politicians or church ministers, teachers, lecturers. Pay attention to the way they use language. Now, competent speakers will use language idiomatically, and you can learn a lot about the skills of mastering the idioms of a particular language. The other way, of course, is you've got to read. No writer can survive very long without reading extensively. You have to read as widely as you can, and we have been suggesting some authors you got to read, you must read. I have not listed any specific text, but I will keep mentioning writers that you are to read. Now, if you come from Fiji, it's a good idea for you to read some local writers. Read writers who have gone through the struggle of learning to use English as a second language for creative purpose. Writers like Larry Thomas, writers like Heroniko, Raymond Pillay. There are numerous other writers in Fiji, Satyanandan. These writers have gone through the experience of learning from the basic concepts in the language to idiomatic use of language, and now creative use of language. Now, that's the third stage, creative use of language. How can you use language creatively? Now, this is the most difficult part. You have mastered the mechanics, the grammar of the language. You are fairly competent with the idiomatic use of the language. Now you have to proceed to be creative. It is almost a definition of creative writing that you must use language creatively, you must use language innovatively, you must use language brightly, you must language in an original way in order to be creative. So creativity and use of language are very much tied together. Now, how can you become creative in a second language? I would suggest that you try and bring in the resources of your own language into your creative writing. Be it simply the vocabulary, certain vocabulary that you think would be useful in what you want to express. You can bring certain expressions, translate them into English. Now, writers throughout the world have continuously contributed to the English language in this way. They have brought the resources of their own language to the English language and created something fresh and original. Every country where where colonization have taken place, a brand of English have been created. In Fiji, you can say that there is something called Fiji English, and writers like Joe Nodola and Larry Thomas, they have used the local version, local variety of English in order to write their plays. Joe Nodola's plays, I Native No More, Larry Thomas in Outcast, and several other writers have experimented with the use of local language. And of course, there are certain classics that you can turn to, and one of them is G.V. Desani's All About Hatta. I would recommend this very strongly. Now, this is at a very complex and sophisticated use of language. Very competent and innovative experimental use of language. Another writer, Amma, has written a novel called Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, and that language is recognized for very strong use of English language. There are many other writers, and you can take heart from this fact that there are writers in the so-called third world countries who have used English for creative purpose, and they have written outstanding works. Let me conclude by mentioning two writers who have impressed me a great deal. One is Raja Rao, and if you read Kantapura, you will see how an Indian writer has used the resources of his own language in order to create idiomatic variety of English for his creative work. And another is Sam Selvon from the West Indies. Read his Lonely Londoners and you will see how he has used a local variety of English in order to create something bright and original. In the next session, I will talk a little bit about the fortunate place in which bilingual writers are situated.